It's important for us all to remember that the divide that exists between the right and the left is by design. The game players, we're the game pieces, they're the game players.
You're listening to Good is in the Details. I'm Gwendolyn
And I'm Rudy Sallow.
And this is the podcast where we learn what we didn't know in the spirit of Socrates, all with the aim of a more knowledgeable life, and a curious life, an inquisitive life. And today we have, I think, 5-time, maybe 6-time returning guest. I mean, this is one of our favorite people. You've heard him before talk about his books on corruption, on travel, on how to be safe. We have the Jeff Cortese again. Now, Rudy, you are the one who reached out to Jeff and you really wanted to make this interview happen. What was your drive? What did you want out of the interview? And then what did you get out of the interview?
Actually, a couple listeners, some high school friends reached out and said, hey, I'd really like to get Jeff's thoughts on what's going on with all the chaos in the federal government and try to get some kind of unique and call it fresh perspective about the reasons why, different view, an unbiased view, right? And, Jeff has always told it like it is, if you will. That's one thing that a lot of our listeners and friends of his and mine like about him. And he, from his experience working with the U.S. Capitol Police Force, working on the Hill, working for the FBI, and for what he does now, it's just interesting to hear a different perspective. It's a perspective that not a lot of people have friends that were that high up in the FBI to just hear, oh my gosh, what was it like on the inside, and to sit down and have a conversation. And I think that's interesting, especially these days. There's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of what to believe. And so I thought it would be vitally important to have that perspective.
Yeah. I mean, for our listeners, whenever we have somebody on the pod, there's like this rigorous, I'm reading their work and going through everything. I have the notes, the outline. This interview is different from that. This is, a current event, real time, finding an expert and being like, please tell us what's going on. And it's so important because we are living in parallel universes, Rudy. Like, I don't know if you've noticed it, but my friends who have one political leaning and then the others, it's like we have completely different realms of information and then therefore different views of what's going on. And when politicians speak, people don't believe the politicians. The media is called fake. And so it's so important to have the dialogues with the people who are involved. Like the storytelling, the sharing, I think is what we need. And that's what we are offering for you listeners is we want to get the firsthand account. The expert, Jeff Cortese, is always fantastic. And we appreciate him so much. You've seen him on other news outlets. And yeah, we're so grateful that he joins Good is in the Details. And before we get started, we have to let everybody know that we're still on our Magic Mind journey, that beautiful elixir. And you can get 20% off with the discount code magicmind.com/GIID20. And this is a perfect pick-me-up. You can have it with your coffee. It keeps you focused, clear-headed. Get your Magic Mind links in the show notes. All right, now that we're all Magic Mind up, we're going to be talking about these current events, what's going on with the FBI, corruption, firing, hiring. What in the world? Jeff Cortese, please guide us.
It's a good point, and that brings up the episode title. And
okay.
What did I come up with? I came up with something, didn't I? I texted you about this, Gwen. What did we decide?
So
I just want to, what you did with our last episode was terrific, Rudy, with the titling. Here's one. Let me pitch it on, okay?
Our last one is skyrocketed in downloads. Everybody, thank you for listening to that episode on Spinoza. Okay, all right. Now it's Jeff's turn. What do we got?
Justice, tradition, and the FBI.
All right, that's what we're going with. Let's hear about it with the Jeff Cortese.
Here's the thing, though. Jeff, we reached out to you, and I'm going to tell you why we reached out to you, is because a lot of our listeners are asking for your thoughts about everything that's going on with the federal workforce and the firings and the FBI. And you've been putting out some, thoughts and pieces and content and this and that. And I don't want to put you on the spot. This is a very delicate situation here. It's delicate for you. It's delicate for me. It's delicate for the podcast. I don't know exactly what's going to come out of this conversation. I think the point here is to try to be as objective as humanly possible. We did an episode a couple of years ago on objectivity and January 6th and the election stuff, and I thought that was a really great approach. I'd like to try to model that here. I'd actually like to ask you, where do you think we, both good as in the details and the audience and the people that listen to this, need to start?
Go with the easy questions first, Rudy.
I try to take an arm's length distance, despite what it might seem, from social media, because it is so easy to get worked up really quickly on subjects, and people are moved by different topics and different stories. So to presume to know what everybody wants to talk about, it would be outside of my...
I got an idea. I was thinking about this episode, and I'm thinking about our relationship and our friendship and your excellent writing. I remember really starting to get involved. In fact, you shared the piece with me a number of years ago before you put it out there, and it had to do with back about 9 or 10 years ago when there were certain elements of the electorate wanting Hillary Clinton to be investigated by the DOJ, and why wasn't there prosecution? You put out an amazing, thoughtful piece as to why that was not going to happen, why that shouldn't happen, and why that's never going to happen. However, fast forward a number of years later, something like that happened. So it was like this kind of weird double thing. So I'm almost wondering, like, how do we address this from a I know we don't have all the time in the world, but from a historical perspective of what happened that was so unusual, and why are these firings, occurring at the FBI and everything with the CIA and all that other type of stuff. But I think a historical look is always the way I like to approach things.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Historical look in terms of, are we talking about the difference between, the Hillary Clinton investigations versus the Trump?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, Trump, yes, a little bit of both. But I think this is something where, like, if you don't provide the history of what the FBI has done in the past, what's going on may seem like completely crazy. And maybe you can just let the audience know why you either A, agree that it's completely crazy, or B, say, no, this isn't completely crazy. But everyone's here to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, can I throw out one thing? I want to add to that, and this is going to be, a rather dull thing, but just flat out, what is the function, the purpose of the FBI? That will go into the history, because if we understand, I think, what its role is, then it makes more sense to make claims or have thoughts about where it is right now. So, like, what is the purpose and its function? Because I think if we don't know what that is and its relationship to the executive branch, if we don't know that, then it's hard to make a judgment call about what's going on. So that ties into the historical part.
Yeah, no, I think that's good and helpful. Let me try to get, the ball rolling a little bit here with that. Overall, the mission of the FBI is to protect the American people by upholding the Constitution of the United States. Their focus, in contrast to, say, the CIA, is, their focus is domestic, within the borders of the United States. That isn't to say that we don't, or my former employer, that we didn't and don't work matters that cross borders. We do, obviously. But the emphasis is on protecting the people in the United States and upholding the Constitution. The FBI's investigative authority is probably broader than any other federal law enforcement agency. I say probably, and that's not accurate. It is broader. The agency itself is broken up into really kind of what we call two sides of the house: the national security side and the criminal side. On the national security side, you're going to have an emphasis on counterterrorism and counterintelligence. On the criminal side, you're going to have everything from bank robberies to organized crime to drug trafficking organizations to healthcare fraud, mortgage fraud, all those, public corruption, civil rights, also on the criminal side. And then you've got, a cyber element as well, which could be criminal in nature. It could be counterintelligence in nature. So that's the summary of the FBI, who they are, what they do, in very short summary.
And then what is their relationship to the executive branch? Because I think some of the issues helpful right now is like, wait a minute, what is the context of that relationship? Because I feel like if I understood that, like, who is in charge?
Yeah, so we've got obviously the three branches of government, the executive branch being one of them. The FBI is part of DOJ, Department of Justice. The Department of Justice falls under the executive branch, and the President of the United States is the head of the executive branch. So if you look at it in terms of a hierarchy, the head of the executive branch, being the President of the United States, can and does have influence over the investigative priorities, the Department of Justice and the FBI. And, I think some of what we're seeing in this transition from, the Biden administration to the Trump administration is people are being exposed to that for the first time in ways that maybe historically they hadn't been because of lack of understanding or lack of exposure or just the impact social media is having on information sharing.
So when the FBI is investigating something, that is under the direction in part of the executive branch? Can they stop an investigation or can they initiate one?
Yeah,
or
so
is that just DOJ?
It's the FBI is in whole under the executive branch.
Okay.
So not even in part, right? Now, you've got an FBI director and you have an attorney general. Historically, the attorney general was frequently replaced or always replaced when a new president came into power. The political nature of that position is not lost on historians, right? I mean, if you look at, there's no more clear politicizing of that position than when JFK selected his own brother to be the attorney general, right? I mean, nobody's going to have your back like your brother. And so that political component has always been there in the attorney general and in the Department of Justice to some degree or another, right? The FBI director typically is going to keep their position until either their tenure, which is a relatively new concept post J. Edgar Hoover. They put a term limit of 10 years. That doesn't mean they get to serve 10 years. It just means that it would take an approval to exceed or to stay in the position longer than 10 years. But they do serve at the pleasure of the President of the United States, who has every authority to swap them out whenever he deems appropriate. So the FBI is going to, through its intelligence collection and its myriad processes, establish priorities based on the information that is out there. But at the end of the day, the President of the United States is the head of the executive branch and has every right and authority to nudge that and move those priorities one way or another based on whatever he deems to be appropriate.
Okay. And then in the context of right now, what is perfectly legal but unusual that is happening right now? Because people keep saying unprecedented. So I think that's where Rudy's like, what's the historical context? Like, what is this current administration doing that is different and has got all the headlines? People are saying it's illegal or is it legal? I just want to know what is the truth?
She wants to know what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
Jeff. That's basically what's going on.
We've talked about this before. I am sitting here and I'm like, I think I am in an algorithm bubble. And because there are people who are cheering on this administration's moves when it comes to the FBI, like, yeah, clear it out. And then there's other people who are saying, this is awful, this is destructive. I just would like to know, wait a minute, first of all, is it legal to go ahead and go into the FBI and say, we're going to eliminate you if you worked on January 6th? Or do you have to have some other cause for firing somebody? I don't know. I just would like some clarification because I think I'm in an information bubble and I don't know.
Yeah, it gets really hard. One, it's hard to find the right source of information. Two, when you do go searching for it, there is a flood of politics influencing all of this, right? The right is going to hold very identifiable, easy to identify positions. The left is the same, right? And so there are three sides to every story. There's, his version, her version, and the truth. And I think there's a little bit of that goes on. And the fact is that the loudest voices are hyper political. And so it makes it very difficult to weed through all of that. As far as, boy, there's so much. An hour wouldn't even be enough to scratch the surface on some of this stuff.
I know. I mean, well, I'm wondering when they say that like there was 1,500 arrests for January 6th, and any person in the FBI who is connected to that is going to be considered for somebody to be let go. And from my understanding, is that could be somebody of a higher position just passing on the investigation for somebody else to go investigate.
Yeah.
And the fact that people came from all over the United States to go to DC on that day means that you have FBI agents all over the country who it would have passed their hands. And now their job is, under review. Now, is this like people who are cheering it on are saying, yes, this is exactly what we want to do. Clear it out, drain the swamp, get rid of everybody. What am I missing?
Yeah, no, I think in large part, one, the authority exists. The president can do that if he wants to. I don't see that being a realistic approach. I think there's indications that that's not happening. I definitely heard some of the static, just like everybody else did. There were certainly some concerns. I would certainly not agree with that approach. I think that there are a lot of people who are pushing that strong and sweeping action of getting rid of all these people. It doesn't make any sense from where I'm standing, but does it make sense? No. Could he do it? Sure. Do I think he's going to do it? No. And like I said, I think there's indications. I think that I'm theorizing here, but I think there's a certain extent of what Trump does is hyperbole to draw attention to discussions. I think he wants people to be a little bit worried about how they handle their day to day. And so the fear of something as simple as being involved in this investigation from his vantage point or perspective is he's trying to shake things up and get people thinking about that as they're going through their day to day work. Should I be doing this? Now, there's a lot more nuance to all of this. I can look at these investigations personally and say, listen, a lot of it doesn't add up. There's a lot that I have a difficult time with. The Capitol Police and the DC Metro Police could have handled a lot of those investigations. There were a lot of misdemeanor charges and even lone misdemeanor charges, so no felonies. That's really outside what you're accustomed to seeing at the FBI, not necessarily within the, just something that is time well spent for them, doing misdemeanors. I can tell you I had one, and it was related to what ultimately was going to be a hit on somebody. This person didn't know the hit was occurring. That's why they got away with the misdemeanor, not a felony. And that's in my career. So my point is we don't do that generally, standalone misdemeanor charge. So that seems a little bit heavy-handed. Trying all these in D.C., it's a hyper-political case. You got 90-some-odd% of D.C. voters are Democrat. Are you getting an objective jury at that point, given the hyper-political nature of these cases? There's a lot to look at. Does that result in all these people, if you're on the right, did I put something out? I said that anyone who thinks that anyone who touched the J6 investigations or the Trump investigation should be fired is misguided. I don't believe that to be even close to reasonable. These were legitimate law enforcement investigations. Even if I can identify problem areas within the scope of whether or not the FBI should be doing these things, they were lawful. Reasonable suspicion is a pretty low standard to open up an investigation. The priorities are established by people above them. Now, should those above them have made engaged in discussion to ensure that the FBI is using its time wisely? Maybe. Probably, I think so. But those who are working these investigations, FBI agents are nothing but a bunch of racehorses in a starting gate, man. They just want to work. The cases were lawful. They were based on a low standard of reasonable suspicion, which is a standard across the board. They don't establish the priorities of the agency. And so working those investigations, they're not violating anything. And so any suggestion that they should be removed by the mere fact that somebody else is prioritizing this as above other work is not their fault of theirs, in my opinion.
It seems like, as far as a historical context, that the FBI has kind of been on the shit list for left-leaning people. And there's been this huge swap where it seems like the left-leaning people are the ones who are a bit more supportive of law enforcement. I'm just wondering what happened here, because law enforcement, I would imagine that law enforcement and the FBI tends to draw people who are more conservative thinking, that's simply the nature of the profession. In the same way with the university system, it tends to draw people who are a bit more on the progressive or liberal, because the institution itself of education is about questioning, like not only learning what is, but questioning to see if there's possibilities of, different answers for old questions. So that's an inherently more of a liberal, mindset. So it makes sense that there's more of a draw of lefties, let's say, who go to a university, whereas the idea of conserving and protecting and keeping everything under wraps, like that's more of a conservative. So it's that draw. I'm just wondering, how is such a more conservative area of our political and social life now on the shit list of a bunch of right-leaning people? Like, what happened?
Yeah, it's a good question, and
thank you.
I say that all the time. That's like my podcast staple.
Only
right?
to me.
That's right. Only to you. That's right, because you're the only one asking good questions.
Jeff.
Rudy, you take note.
Don't you go telling somebody else they have a good question.
I'm working on it. For crying out loud, I'm working on it. She's just so much big. She's the philosopher. And if you listen to the Spinoza episode, it turns out the whole point of philosophy is to ask questions. Right. Because the answers are dumb and boring. So, Jeff, if you don't want to answer this question, that's okay for our philosophy listeners.
I do want to answer
because philosophy listeners don't actually want answers, right, Gwen?
That's right. We just come up with a great question.
Let me answer your question.
And then we tune out. No, go ahead.
I'm going to answer your question with a question. No, I'll try to answer your question. I think, in recent years, I think simple terms, a lot of it goes back to James Comey. And what year was it? I guess it was 2000, whatever year it was, when he went publicly to discuss the Hillary Clinton investigation and outline.
October of 2016, I believe, is
I think it was
actually
June or July, and then October something else happened. And I'll explain that in a second.
Okay.
But yeah,
Okay.
So it was June or July where he came out and publicly discussed the investigation. He talked about all the reasons, all that they had discovered, or, a summary of it. Basically, how she violated the law, and then ended it by saying that no reasonable prosecutor would prosecute it. There's so many reasons why this whole thing was kind of a mess. One, prosecutorial discretion is reserved for DOJ, not the FBI. We investigate, they determine. But problems arose early on because the Department of Justice and the Attorney General was on a plane with I think this, if I'm remembering correctly, was, seen on a plane with Bill Clinton prior to or during the investigation with Hillary Clinton, which created a lot of confusion. I say confusion, a lot of the stories started there. What's the Attorney General doing on a plane with Bill Clinton during an investigation with Hillary Clinton? That doesn't look very good. So I believe, if my memory serves, she stepped out of the picture and James Comey was given discretionary authority of some kind. But anyway, he publicly said this is what had happened. This is the law she broke, or arguably broke. Like I said, no prosecutor would proceed with this. That upset a lot of people. And Comey started the ball rolling before that in other ways, to be honest with you. He appointed as his deputy director Andrew McCabe. This was a point, I think we've maybe talked about this in the past, but that lit me up when I heard about that, because his wife was running for state office, or had been running for state office, and I knew that the perception of this was not going to be very good. He's going to be in pictures with his wife, who's running for state office, and other people that we reasonably might be investigating. No direction of his, we might not prosecute those people, but it will look like he had an influence in that, right? So there were a lot of problems that I think root back to Comey. And then I think, to your point, Rudy, in October, I think he sent a letter to Congress. This was, a little bit before the election, saying that they were reopening the investigation or looking at a computer, right? I think this was, Congressman Weiner's computer.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so that was shortly before the election itself.
Are we sure it's pronounced Weiner? I mean, it's not Viner or something. Can it really be Congressman Weiner? And I refuse to believe. I'm sorry. Go on. I'm being silly again. I'm sorry.
But if somebody along the way should have been like, you know what? I have an idea. We're gonna change the last name.
Let's at least pronounce it something
especially
different.
Since you have a sexual predatory.
It didn't. Yeah, it didn't help.
So you guys are digressing with me. You guys are being
come on,
immature. You guys are. I brought this level down. I'm sorry about that. Sorry about that. Go on, Jeff. I apologize.
So a lot of those factors started to really upset people, right? So that, I think, is a good starting point for where things really started to fall apart. And it, continues to progress. I think part of the problem is the FBI tries to stay above the fray. The mistake they make sometimes is they lack the proper self-awareness to understand, when making certain decisions, how they might impact the way people view them and why that matters so much. They pride themselves on not caring what people think. We're going to do the right thing no matter what, is kind of the approach. And sometimes in doing that, they deceive themselves about what may be the right thing to do. That's, like I said, this is a much longer discussion.
How do we make a life? And really, how do we make a good one? If you long to pursue the life worth living and feel more human and less like a cog in the machine, listen to the More Human with Dr. Angela podcast.
With this discussion of or this proposal to go in and eliminate a bunch of FBI agents, what do you think the impact is going to be on from the public trust when it comes to the FBI, or maybe even with the executive branch? That's also what I'm wondering. I mean, are people going to be relieved and say, yeah, Trump really cleared everything out and everything's good now, or is it going to damage? What do you see?
Well, if I could add one additional point to what we were just discussing, and then I'll come to that. Yeah, no problem. Is truly unprecedented, and is when the FBI, and something else that did not help them was executing a search warrant on the then former president of the United States, and then having an investigation result in criminal charges. So, we talked about what, Rudy, you brought up, what was the historical perspective versus, modern day perspective. We want to talk about unprecedented. That truly was an unprecedented thing.
I don't know if anybody in the world knows that. I only know that because, as I said, I read your writings. Sometimes even before they go out, I've questioned you, and you have trained me on the history of things legally, and I've learned so much from you. Like, maybe some people would say, well, wait a minute, what about Nixon? Like, what happened with Nixon? Or what about this? Or what about that? The answer is no. This is the first time that's ever happened, correct?
Yeah, it's the first time it ever happened. And so then the natural response from some folks on the left would be, well, that's because we've never had a criminal like this before. And one of the tweets I put out a week or two ago was, even FBI agents couldn't possibly appreciate the unprecedented nature of the Trump investigation if they didn't work at FBI headquarters and see how many of these investigations were not allowed to proceed against predecessors of Trump. So what I mean by that is, there have been allegations, there have been legitimate investigations where either investigative methods and or investigations themselves weren't allowed to proceed against what I coined a phrase when I was at FBI headquarters, TITP, too important to prosecute. Because we had instances where we knew DOJ was not letting us go forward because this person was just too important to prosecute. The impact from their viewpoint would be too significant to the political sphere. And so if you take all of that into context and look at what Trump was pursued with, and for, the easy answer is nobody's been as criminal as Trump. The right answer is nobody's been allowed to pursue investigations of this nature. That is an unprecedented, and that is going to impact the perception of the FBI. The problem is, like I said, FBI agents are racehorses in a starting block. They just want to run. They don't care who it is. The gatekeeper of all that is DOJ. DOJ makes that determination, the prosecutors, whether or not they can go forward or not. So a lot of the flack that the FBI has gotten is really the result of DOJ's decisions on how to proceed.
And let me ask a really quick question. We could say this has never happened in history before, and that's with respect to people running for president, people that are sitting in the president's office. Obviously, they have immunity, but that also goes towards too important to prosecute. Great one, by the way. That's a good one. That also goes for former presidents, correct?
Explain. Say that again.
Well, meaning, like, I hear what you're saying. Hey, this has never happened before. We've never done this type of investigation. And that in this instance, this was the investigation or prosecution of a former president for acts that he did while he was a president. But that's never been done before.
I'm not saying there haven't been investigations. There have been.
But no prosecutions.
No prosecutions, and oftentimes a guardrail placed on investigative techniques that were used.
Even of former presidents. These are people who are technically, now private citizens. Again, that applies for that too. That's what I think our audience needs to understand. It's not just for a president or someone running for president. It also applies to people that were former presidents. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes.
I'm just wondering about some of the logic of this, that just because it hasn't been done before, and let's just say other people have committed crimes, does it follow that he shouldn't have been investigated? Like if I was on trial for robbing a bank, I couldn't say, well, I've never, or other people commit murders, therefore you should not prosecute me for robbing this bank.
Yeah, no,
so what's the I'm wondering if it's a relevancy issue. Like, all of this that you're saying is true. It has never happened before. There have been investigations on other top people and it hasn't been pursued. But how much relevance does that have to him being investigated? I don't know. That's where I'm stuck on.
I totally get that. And I think it's a very good question and an important one that we all ask. What I would say is this. I'm a huge advocate of, hey, if they broke the law, they should be held accountable. The idea that people are not above the law is just not accurate. There are people who are above the law. It's just an unfortunate reality. Now, should we not take this and say, look, this is a great example of we're changing the way that we approach these things. Now we are saying nobody is above the law. The problem is, the problem with the way that it was done is this is post-Russian investigation, where a lot went wrong on the FBI's side. A lot was done incorrectly. There were issues that occurred there. There were issues that occurred with Andrew McCabe, the former deputy director, and he was, relieved of his responsibilities at the FBI. There was a clear, over time, there was a clear interest in pursuing Donald Trump that extended beyond what would be reasonable based on all the things that we saw, right? So if I truly believed we had a changing of the guard, a totally new approach on all of this stuff, then I'd say that's great. Then this should be the case with all of them. I just don't think that there were indications that that's the case. We can use an example of, Trump's investigation one of them was in large part about, the retaining of classified information. Coincidentally, we found a bunch of classified documents in Biden's garage or wherever it was at his home a few weeks after all this comes to light, right? There were no charges that were there. And when they did the internal investigation, the IG investigation, the determination from the IG was, or the special prosecutor rather, was, he couldn't testify and be believable, the president of the United States at the time. That was part of their conclusion. And not that he couldn't be believable, he didn't seem to have all his faculties, I think is what they had concluded. Pretty selective, right? I mean, we can look at these things. Now it's his DOJ, he's the head of the executive branch. The idea that presidents and retaining records, I mean, like, it's such a low in terms of overall meaningful investigations. It just, coming after the Russian investigation, coming after what happened with McCabe, coming after what happened with Peter Strzok, we're going to get this guy, right? We've got a backup plan. He and Lisa Page. Peter Strzok was a former DAD over at the FBI over counterintelligence who had responsibility for the Trump investigation. And he was, there were plenty of political things that came out about the things that he and Lisa Page were saying, which is fine. People have political views until you start putting it in writing on bureau phones and you're responsible for the investigation. It gives the appearance of losing objectivity. My point is if you look at the historical context of the FBI and they're so very focused on perception, there were investigations in New Orleans when I worked public corruption. If we had too many cases going after that were viable towards a particular demographic, DOJ is going to say, we're not doing this. There's too many of these demographic that we're going after, regardless of the fact that the evidence is taking us there, right? They seem to completely discard their historical view of perception when it came to Trump in a way that was highly suspicious. There were people who I think didn't appreciate the fact that he was a disruptor of the norms. People want consistency in their their politicians, their elected officials, and Trump's a big disruptor of that. And it makes people really uncomfortable because things become less predictable at that point. I don't know how much that had to do with it, but I'm all for holding everyone accountable. But if there are people who are going to be above the law and we're going to be selective about who we pursue, that I don't believe that we should be selective in that way, not with our president.
As we're getting closer to wrapping up, we're not quite there yet, Jeff. I think everything that you just said was, look, we got to be objective. Objectivity is the name of the game. This is government, this is people's lives. And that's nice to say and do, but we as humans, and especially in this country where this is a very, we're obsessed with sports, we're obsessed with taking sides, we're obsessed with us versus them. Is that even a reality? Is there a reality here where we can't even be objective when our side wins? And I get that, hey, it's not, so what, Rudy? So what if it's not the reality? That's what we should do. I guess I'm trying to philosophize here about things, and I'm trying to tie this to our philosophy here is, at the end of the day, is it much more important to try to be objective, or at least give the appearance of objectivity, even though we all know that it's an impossibility?
Yeah, I mean, I could try aggressively to be objective in all things, but I know that I can't shake all my biases. I have opinions, and those are always going to find a way to seep in one way or another. I think the fight is a righteous one to have, though, with yourself, is to try to accept the fact that, listen, the next time my favorite politician is telling me that this is so horrible and illegal and this and that, you got to start with, okay, well, he's fighting for something that is outside of, like, these people do not, it's not about the truth. They're party first on the right and the left, these politicians, right? So just starting with at that point of the vast majority of people who are have the biggest voices are coming from a very politically slanted viewpoint. Is it possible? I think it's possible. It's hard to figure it all out sometimes. That's always going to be the biggest challenge, I think, is people can be objective and not know that they're objectively wrong.
I've never experienced that.
Good one. Gwen, what say you? Do you have some philosophical wisdom for us here? Something from John Locke or Socrates, something that were something to help us in these interesting times, please. You're really good at that stuff.
Well, you're the best, Rudy. Most of the time. No, I think for me, I was kind of going back to like my critical thinking class and argument structures and just trying to figure out, like, wait a minute, what definitions are we working with? Are we dealing with the fallacy of tradition, where we just appeal to tradition and that's the end of it without some reason. But I really appreciate, Jeff, everything that you're saying, because it's true. It's the human condition. We want to get things right, but we have a unique point of view and we have influences. And so, we have to reflect on that, which is one of the reasons why I love talking to you, because I am, I am in an information bubble. I try to avoid that, but I am seeing things on the news where there is such a divide where people are cheering or booing the exact same thing. And I have to stop and say, wait a minute, why is somebody cheering something that I'm booing? What's happening? Those are the kinds of critical thinking skills that I think that we need. I will ask for your point of view on something, and if you can say it in very quickly. Kash
Sure.
Patel, great nominee or crazy nominee?
Feel free to not
No,
answer
I'll answer
that. I am not your attorney, but I am an attorney, and as
use
a
a different
former
adjective.
FBI employee, you feel free to just ask Gwen a question back and philosophize. Just go ahead.
I actually, my first instinct was he's not my first pick, was my first reaction, and I'm a little
That's a
bit
great
hesitant. It's hard because he came from this previously with Trump administration. He was in a political role, and politics is different than law enforcement, and the two things are not the same. So he's going to say things politically when he's in that role that when he gets into a law enforcement capacity, I hope he's able to shelve, right? So I have to take a wait and see approach. Like I said earlier, I do think that Trump is a little bit of operates in hyperbole. He likes to get the topic to bubble to the top, and one way to do that is to be extreme in his approaches on things. I think there is a fix that needs to happen at the FBI. As many of my fellow FBI colleagues have mentioned, it requires more of a scalpel than a chainsaw. He is coming in with maybe the threat of a chainsaw, but so far all indications and things I'm hearing, I'm hopeful that he's going to take the scalpel approach. He's smart. All those things. So my biggest concern is that the head of the FBI remain as objective as possible when prioritizing law enforcement action. I am hopeful that that's going to be the case.
All right.
Hope that is it.
But that's all we have.
Thing.
Yeah, right.
Hope. Yeah, no, it's a good thing, Gwen, that we all need to have hope. We all need to have these conversations. We all need to reach out to everybody who we think is on this side or that side and have intelligent, calm, fruitful discussions, much like this one. And Jeff, we thank you, sir. It's always an honor to have you on.
You know, I enjoy it more than you probably do. I love hanging out with you guys. I just wish
You're awesome. You're awesome, and you're a good person, thinker.
I appreciate
it's really a joy to, I don't know that things are so divided right now that I don't know that a lot of people are lucky enough to have friends who are smart, who have different worldviews, sometimes opposing worldviews, but can have a lovely and joyful conversation. And we are absolutely lucky, and it is absolutely my joy to be able to broadcast this, to say, hey, look, you can have people with different backgrounds having a fruitful dialogue. So thank you.
I love doing it. I love being here. And it's important for us all to remember that the divide that exists between the right and the left is by design. The game players, we're the game pieces. They're the game players. And the game players need us on opposing sides. And they need to be vigorous because that's how they're able to do what they do. So it helps to know that this disdain, they want us to have that. And so, sometimes it's good to step back and take a breath.
Okay. All right. Well, we will be breathing easier now that we don't.
Indeed.
Good is in the Details is produced by Dr. Gwendolyn and Rudy Sallow. Remember to try out Magic Mind and get your discount. We're doing 7 days. Just see how you feel after 7 days of this beautiful elixir that gives you clarity and focus. Start your Magic Mind journey, your 7-day trial, your mental performance shot, and get up to 40% off your first subscription or 20% off one-time purchase with the offer code GIID20. That's magicmind.com/GIID20. Remember, you can support the pod by going to patreon.com/goodisinthedetails. I will link it in the show notes. You can join our book club, get behind the scenes content, and support the pod. We're also on Facebook and Instagram, Good is in the Details Pod, and you can get in touch with us through our website, goodisinthedetails.com. Also check out our show notes for links to Jeff's work. He's got fabulous books. You'll learn a lot, all about corruption and how to stay safe. Okay, until next time, bye.